Um, so the first thing that I noticed was that you clearly expressed the activity and its purpose first. You let them know like where you were coming from, why you had pulled them aside, and so they seemed very at ease with what they were doing. I noticed that you had a student reading aloud, and the other student, Chiamaka, wasn't really um, reading the directions with her. So I'm wondering if there's a way to maybe like split that between them or something, or just to make sure that the directions are clear for all students involved.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I ended up having Srimaka read from like this example part on because I do think that students tend to check out sometimes when another student is reading directions or reading aloud from a book. And I think because it was such a small lesson, I wasn't as concerned that about the directions being um, explicit, like, I don't know if explicit is the right word, listened to completely while they were being read. It was more just like giving each of them, getting them into the lesson. It would have been ideal, and I should have maybe had her following along. But I think because it was so small, I knew that the directions would be communicated to them, whether it was through Asha reading them and getting them, and Chimaka following along, or Asha reading them and then Chimaka like asking a question of me after.
Okay, so breaking it up a little more. I did notice that when you were reading your example modeling for them, Chiamaka's eyes started wandering, and it seems like she was not processing it, the auditory, so well. I did notice that you held up your paper so she could read along with you. I'm wondering if maybe that would be, if that's something that you would translate if you're doing this lesson with a larger group, having like the visual available for that type of learner as well.
Yeah. So I think if I did this for a larger group, I would definitely make copies of my example because I think having the physical copy would be helpful in terms of following along. I also think I would maybe make more examples of figurative language and call on students to identify them, just because then they have to be listening, and that the class they like to participate. So I think that they would be interested in that, or that would maintain interest. And I think also I I wanted to read it in my own voice, because the purpose was like getting to know a little bit about me. So I wanted to read it myself and give like the inflection maybe that I was thinking, and just kind of like be able to make little comments here and there. But I think I would maybe also like have people read it aloud if I was doing it in a larger group, because I think it would be harder to maintain attention. And yeah, and I would want the purpose of the lesson to be completely communicated.
Okay. I noticed that you used hand signals, fist to five, for their understanding, and you noticed that they seemed a little bit unclear about it, but neither student asked for an explanation, and you explained the hand signal for them to use. In a really quick aside, I noticed that you checked to make sure they knew the definitions of simile and metaphor before you went on with the lesson. And I was wondering if that was one of the objectives of the lesson, or if the objective was if it was just a getting to know you activity, or if it was also like a figurative language activity.
Yeah. So that wasn't something we had covered in like our curriculum so far in the summer. The purpose was getting to know you, and I thought that this would be a cool activity to engage students in. I thought it would be interesting and they'd like it, and also just that it would give like kind of a positive spin, like that idea of a superhero, which at the age that they're at, I think it's really easy to think of yourself as like not that cool, not that great, not a superhero, like the opposite of superhero. So I really wanted to just do that lesson, and I kind of was looking for a way to maybe incorporate some learning, some practice into it. And similarly was something that I was fairly confident that they had worked with before, and would know and wouldn't require necessarily like a whole lesson on that, because I wanted them to really focus on like their expression and their creativity. So that's why I worked in simile, and because it lent itself well to the lesson, as I think you can see like in their writing. I'm trying to think what else you were addressing.
Yeah, I noticed that you put a very positive spin on everything that you included, not just like asking for a stretch of the imagination with the superpowers, but also asking them to share a little bit more personally about themselves with the everyday superpowers. And I noticed they really opened up to that, and they had a lot to discuss. You used some of the examples in your model. I noticed you had a very clear model for exactly what they were supposed to do. And you used some of the examples in your model to open up a line of inquiry, to open up a conversation with them about themselves. And I noticed that became something that the conversation sort of continued, and it went from their lives to about a movie. And I was wondering, especially with a lesson like that, where you have you only have 2 students, and it's an activity designed around getting to know them. At what point does the conversation become just conversation, and at what point is it helpful to that purpose of the lesson?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was something that definitely in the moment I hadn't necessarily anticipated, and I was kind of just making like slight judgment calls on that. I think, yeah, the purpose was to get to know them. So if things went off on a tangent, I wasn't like super anxious to draw it back in. Also, the topic was so broad that I never knew what they would get inspiration from. That maybe they'd talk about one movie and then think about another movie, and that would be, they would think like, oh, that's a superpower that I want to incorporate, like, and it would come from that. But at the same time, I also, like, if they weren't writing and weren't like actively brainstorming and thinking for like a while, I definitely wanted to like try to rein them in. And I don't know, I think that was successful some of the time, but a couple of times it took like getting to a specific point in the conversation where I could like easily interject and bring them back around to the assignment. So I think I would try to use this as a learning experience if I did it in a bigger classroom, or just again in a different way, to kind of have a more concrete system in place for like what conversation should be allowed, like, and what my strategies for reining them back in would be. But in terms of this lesson, I don't think it was like a huge deal. But
yeah. I guess did you see that they used some of the ideas they had been talking about in their writing?
Sorry, can you like the ideas that they had been talking about?
Yeah. Just that you brought up the point that that this was an activity about like creative thinking about themselves and what they were feeling, and so and it wasn't clear like at what point it became just sort of chatting, and at what point it was something that they could write about. And so I was wondering if in their writing you saw some of like the fruits of the conversation.
Yeah.
And the ideas they had expressed.
I'm trying to think back on exactly what they talked about, but I think at one point they kind of were talking like more casually about their siblings, and I think that led Chimaka to, oh, I have 3 siblings. My siblings always eat all my food, and then she talked about that.
Okay.
I'm not sure if that came before or after.
Okay.
I'd have to go back and rewatch the video because it's not completely clear in my mind what the timeline of that was. But that would be like an explicit example of like she was talking about this with Asha and me, and then it became something she wrote about.
Okay.
I definitely think if conversation came up in another lesson like this, I would try to channel it into their writing a little bit more. I think I tried to do that, but I think that would be like a focus, was let's have conversation develop naturally, but then like also what can I do as the teacher to facilitate that moving into their writing. And just kind of, I think that's the idea too, that you can gain inspiration from anywhere. So.
Okay, that seems, that makes a lot of sense for this objective. I guess a couple more things. I noticed that you had a quick brainstorming time rather than having them just free write so they could sort of gather their ideas. I noticed that you were recognizing what was going on with the students in the moment. Like you noticed that Chiamaka was feeling cold, and so you moved yourself so she could get out of the air conditioning. I noticed you finding connections between what they were saying and what you were saying, and redirecting some of that toward their writing, specifically with the siblings. I guess the last question, and it's sort of difficult with like a personal writing exercise like that, is if there would be a point in the lesson, I guess, if you were having like a larger class in particular, if there would be a moment in the lesson where the students should specifically work together to brainstorm or converse or.
Yeah, I think it would depend on like the topic. So for this situation, it wasn't, they were kind of inherently like working together because they were two people together at a table, and they were like, they knew that they were kind of free to talk together. In a larger lesson setting, I think I would more strictly enforce the like 5-minute brainstorm time, and maybe not give them the sheet that they were going to write their final copy on right away, because Asha and Chiamaka didn't really brainstorm that much. They're both pretty confident writers, so I could have foreseen that happening maybe. But I think, yeah, in a larger classroom, I would do like 5-minute brainstorm and maybe do a turn and talk to share the ideas, and maybe like, you know, so they had to write a simile. So maybe if they had an idea down, someone could suggest like an idea for a simile with that, or help them out. And that could maybe bring some collaboration into it. But I think that would be more applicable to like a larger group lesson. But I would be definitely interested in trying that.
Cool. Well, that's all I got.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.